So during 2020, the big lockdown year, the COVID-19 year, the pandemic, the deep recession of 7% GDP decline, how did the various categories of shopping center perform, given the relative performance in certain retail categories? Now, during the course of last year, various retailer categories performed differently. The most stable ones being those essential food and grocery items. They didn't get locked down severely during the hard lockdown of the second quarter. They didn't boom much there afterwards. They were just what I call the stable outperformers. Pharmaceuticals and medical supplies, very, very similar. Didn't get locked down severely, didn't boom there afterwards severely, just did relatively well all along. Then there were the cyclical outperformers. That stuff, the retail focused on the home. Hardware, DIY, furniture and appliances, stuff related to the home. Got locked down severely during the second quarter, but came back very strongly there afterwards because the focus had changed for a lot of us. We didn't just sleep at home, we worked at home, we taught kids at home. The home became far more important during the lockdown period. And there was a scurry to upgrade office furniture, to a lot of things that got bought to make the home the better place to work or to live, because we were spending a lot more time there, and that became the focus. And then there were the underperformers. That was what Stats SA categories as other personal items, jewelry, recreational equipment of sorts, a lot of other categories which were generally non-essential items, books, stationery, whatever the case may be, which performed very poorly, got locked down severely and performed very poorly there afterwards in a financially pressured time with a consumer under financial pressure. And of course, there was clothing and apparel, still struggling to recover properly. It is highly cyclical during recessions. And then on top of this, of course, if we weren't going out and about and going to work, if we were spending more time at home, probably less need for that type of shopping too. So the centers with the focus on the outperformers would probably do better, and the underperforming retailers, where there was a bigger focus in those centers, they would probably perform poorly. What did we see then if we look at F&B card spend as a proxy for overall sales? Now, it's a pretty big sample size, so it should give a reasonable picture. And for 2000, compared to 2020, I beg your pardon, compared to 2019, we saw that the bigger categories of center underperformed, the smaller categories generally outperformed. So if you've started the one end super regional category, minus 10.4% down on card spends. Regionals minus 5.9%. And so we went through the minor regionals, the smaller regionals still being in negative territory. And when one starts getting to the community center categories and the neighborhood centers, you started to get positive card spend growth. 6.7% for convenience, 6.1% for neighborhood centers. But interestingly enough, the outperformer of them all was not the smallest ones. It was the hypercenters category. Hypercenters, very focused on essentials, food and groceries, and also they tout themselves as an affordable place, a place for bulk buying, a place where you can save money. That's the perception. And that went down very well, and their sales as a category was plus 13.2% growth for 2020. So that was the rough breakdown, which shouldn't be surprising if we look at the focus very quickly. The share of card spend by for some center categories, the super regionals, just as an example, groceries 27.1%. That's significant, but relatively small when you look at the smaller centers. What is a big focus, which is was a drag last year, 23.4% on clothing and apparel. And then, of course, restaurants, fast food, cinemas, while not making up the lion's share of super regionals, but often are the draw card. We go there to eat out, we go there to the cinema, we go there for entertainment. And then at the same time, we can do our grocery shopping too. Take away the popularity of the entertainment, close down the restaurants or put in social distancing requirements, not as appealing anymore. We don't go there in as larger numbers, and therefore even the groceries shopping may suffer as a result. Let's look at neighborhood center card sales. 58.2% groceries. That's more a sweet spot when it comes to 2020's type of situation, where it was all about essentials and far less about luxuries. And then we go to the hyper centers, even more extreme, 81.9% groceries, with a home and furniture component added, a DIY and hardware component added, not much of a focus on restaurants and food. You don't go to the hyper centers specifically for that. So they really hit the sweet spot, it would appear. Let's look at the category of spend, the different categories spend within the centers. And interestingly, so here we see the attraction of the regionals was not there anymore. The experience wasn't necessarily there, with a lot of stuff locked down or social distancing requirements put in place, which made it less appealing. And so in the super regionals, even the grocery shopping showing decline. Clothing and apparel, you wouldn't be surprised to see that. A lot of categories, most of the categories, barring electronics, appliances, and home and furniture, that showed positive growth. Everything else in negative territory. You go to the neighborhood centers, a lot more positive growth across the board, even in the clothing and apparel. The groceries plus 9.7%. So the attraction of the neighborhood center is probably the groceries and more the essentials. And at the same time, so they become more appealing in the lockdown situation than the regionals. And Bob's your uncle, you've got positive growth even in the weak performing segments like clothing and apparel with 14.4%. And that was a very similar situation to the hypercenters too. Groceries 14.2, DIY and hardware 23.4, and even clothing and apparel 25.8%. So even the underperformers outperforming in the hypercenters too. So that's the relative situation there. It's about essentials. It's about affordability. It's about saving money in a tough financial time. The hypercenters and the smaller convenience centers seem to do it better than the super regionals, and the regionals whose focus is a little different. And it probably is more of the same to come in 2021, i.e. a financially tough time where the more essential type of items will tend to outperform, and the centers that focus more on that might be in the relative pound seats as a result.